The sun hung low over Red Creek, painting the horizon in shades of copper and dust. The air was thick with the smell of hay, horse sweat, and gossip. It was one of those days where the town seemed to hold its breath, because whenever something or someone new arrived, Red Creek liked to make a show of it. And today, the show had come in the form of a slow, creaking wagon carrying a figure no one had seen in years. People stepped out of the saloon, the blacksmith's hammer paused mid-swing, and even the preacher's wife stood on her porch, clutching her Bible tighter as the wagon rolled to a stop in front of the general store. A burlap sack covered the figure sitting in the back, the rough fabric brushing against the wind. "She's back," someone muttered. "The beast in the sack." The nickname slithered through the air like a snake, whispered from mouth to mouth, gaining poison with each repetition. The woman didn't move. Her hands, small and pale beneath the frayed edges of the sack, gripped the wood of the wagon's side as if it were her only anchor. She had traveled for days, hungry, exhausted, and nameless. The driver, an old man with sunken eyes, jumped down, muttered something to her, and lifted her carefully. When her boots touched the dirt, she swayed for a moment, steadying herself. She kept her head low, the sack hiding her face, her shame, her past. She could feel the stares like needles through the cloth. Children snickered. "Mama, why's she wearin' that?" one asked. "Hush," came the answer. "Don't look. Some things are better left unseen." Her heart thudded painfully. She had hoped, foolishly, that time would have made people forget. That the town would have changed. But Red Creek never forgot, and it never forgave what it didn't understand. She began to walk toward the far end of town, toward a shed the preacher had agreed to let her use in exchange for cleaning his churchyard. Her feet dragged. The sack stuck to her neck in the heat. She wanted to cry, but tears were a luxury she'd learned to live without. And then, over the murmur of voices, she heard hoofbeats. Heavy, steady, unhurried. The kind of rhythm that belonged to a man who didn't answer to anyone. The sound grew louder until it filled the street, and when she dared to lift her eyes, she saw him. Eli Ward. He was taller than most men, broad-shouldered, built like a mountain carved from muscle and sweat. His hat shadowed a pair of blue eyes that seemed to carry the whole weight of the plains in them. He didn't ride fast or loud, he simply arrived, and that was enough to make every man in Red Creek step aside. He dismounted by the general store, boots hitting the dirt with a solid thud. The murmurs quieted. The horses, as if sensing his calm, snorted and stilled. Eli wasn't a man of many words, but his silence was louder than most men's shouting. He caught sight of her then, the woman in the sack standing by the well, clutching the fabric at her throat as if it were the only thing keeping her whole. She looked small, almost ghost-like against the sunburnt sky. For reasons he couldn't explain, he didn't look away. He walked toward her, his spurs whispering with each step. She stiffened, every muscle tensing beneath the coarse fabric. "You look like you've had a long road," he said, his voice deep, steady, kind. Her hands trembled. She didn't lift her head. "Please, sir," she whispered. "Don't." He paused, frowning slightly. "Don't what?" "Don't pretend kindness," she said, her voice barely more than breath. "It never lasts." Her words hit something deep inside him. He'd known bitterness too. Loss. The kind that made you stop believing in the softness of people. He crouched down to her level, resting his hands on his knees. His voice lowered. "Maybe I ain't pretendin'." The wind caught the edge of the sack and fluttered it for a moment, revealing only her chin, pale, scarred, trembling. She flinched, pulling the fabric back down. He didn't stare, didn't pry, just looked at her, really looked, not at what she hid, but at how carefully she was trying to disappear. The sheriff's wife called from the porch of the store, her voice sharp as a blade. "Eli, don't waste your time. She's trouble. Always was." He didn't move. "Maybe trouble's just another word for someone this town broke," he said softly. The woman gasped under the sack. No one had ever defended her before. Not once. Eli stood, straightening to his full height. He took off his hat and held it against his chest. "Name's Eli Ward," he said. "Got a ranch up past Miller's Creek. I could use help cookin', tendin' to things. Pays fair. Place is quiet." She hesitated, clutching the sack tighter. "You'd hire me." "I'd hire a soul who works hard," he said simply. "Don't much care what folks whisper about." For a long moment, she said nothing. The silence stretched, broken only by the creak of a sign swinging in the wind. Then, Quietly, she nodded. I can cook, she murmured. And clean. I'll earn what you give. That's all I ask. He extended a hand. She stared at it, large, calloused, steady. The hand of a man who built things, not broke them. Slowly, she placed her trembling fingers in his. The townsfolk watched in silence, their gossip dying on their tongues as Eli helped her climb onto his horse. She sat behind him, the sack fluttering slightly as the wind picked up. As he mounted, a man called out, "You'll regret that, Lord." Eli turned his head, eyes calm but cold. "Ain't never regretted doin' what's right," he said, and with that, he nudged his horse forward. The wagon driver spat into the dust and rode off, glad to be rid of his strange passenger. The town slowly went back to its rhythm, though every soul there knew they'd have something to talk about for weeks. But for Eli and the woman in the sack, the road ahead was quiet. The fields rolled golden and endless beneath the sunset, the only sound the rhythmic clop of hooves and the soft whisper of her breath. At one point, she spoke again, her voice uncertain. "Why did you help me?" He didn't look back. "Because once," he said, "someone helped me when I didn't think I deserved it. Guess I'm just passin' it on." The wind lifted the edge of the sack again, brushing against her cheek. She turned her face slightly toward the horizon. For the first time in years, the world didn't feel entirely cruel. And though her face was still hidden, a single tear escaped the sack's edge, glimmering briefly in the dying light before falling into the dust, like something precious returning home. The days at the Ward Ranch moved with the rhythm of the wind, slow, steady, and honest. Morning began with the cry of roosters and the faint hiss of the coffee pot. Eli would rise before the sun, his boots echoing softly across the wooden floors, and step out into the open, where mist still hugged the ground. By the time he came back for breakfast, Clara would already have the fire going. The smell of bread baking and beans simmering would fill the kitchen, warm and quiet. She still wore the sack over her head at first. She never removed it in front of him, even though he never asked her to hide. He pretended not to notice, or maybe he truly didn't care. The ranch was large, too large for one man, and Clara worked tirelessly to keep it in order. She cleaned the tool shed, mended the curtains, scrubbed the floors, and milked the cow when the hired hands forgot. Eli would come home covered in dust and sweat, and the house would smell of stew and soap. Sometimes, when he thanked her, she'd simply nod, the sack shifting slightly with her breath. He'd grown used to silence long ago, but with her, it felt different. It wasn't the hollow silence of loneliness, it was a soft one, heavy with things unspoken, gratitude, pain, maybe something deeper neither of them dared to name. At night, he'd sit on the porch, rolling a cigarette between his fingers, listening to the faint creak of the boards as Clara moved inside. She hummed sometimes, barely audible. Her voice was roughened by time, yet there was something haunting about it, like the sound of an old hymn carried on the wind. He would close his eyes and let it wash over him, as if her quiet presence soothed something raw in his soul. Then one evening, the sky began to change. A storm was brewing on the horizon, the kind that made the horses restless and the cattle low in unease. The clouds rolled in dark and heavy, and the air turned sharp with the scent of rain. Eli worked quickly, securing the barn doors and checking the fences. He could feel the electricity in the air, a warning. Clara came running from the house, her small frame dwarfed by the open sky. The sack clung to her face, soaked through with mist. "Eli," she called, her voice cutting through the rising wind. The gate near the corrals opened. He cursed under his breath, grabbing a lantern. "Stay inside," he shouted. But she didn't listen. She followed him out into the storm, skirts dragging through the mud. The rain came in hard bursts, blurring everything into streaks of silver and shadow. The horses kicked and whinnied, their eyes wide with fear. Eli waded into the chaos, his coat plastered to his back, trying to latch the gate as the wind howled around him. He turned just in time to see her stumble. She fell hard, her hands sinking into the mud. The sack twisted, her breath coming out in ragged gasps. He was beside her in seconds, his large hands lifting her gently. "Clara." His voice cracked against the thunder. "You shouldn't be out here." She pushed at his chest weakly. "I couldn't just watch you," her voice broke. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry," he said. "You just scared me, is all." She shook her head, her voice trembling. "You don't understand, if you see me, you'll." He frowned. "See you." She hesitated, and something inside her seemed to give way. The wind pulled at the sack, tearing it from her hands. For a heartbeat, it hung in the air before being carried off into the storm. The lightning split the sky, and for the first time, he saw her. Her face. She turned away, covering herself with her hands, but it was too late. Scars traced along her cheek and jaw like a map of pain. One eye was slightly clouded, her lips marked by what must have been old burns. Her hair, damp and tangled, clung to her neck. But her eyes, God, her eyes were alive, trembling with fear and shame and something deeper, something that hurt to look at. He didn't move. He didn't recoil. He just looked at her, really looked, through the rain and the dirt and the years of hiding. "You think I care what's on your face?" he said finally, his voice steady despite the thunder. She couldn't meet his eyes. "Everyone does. Then everyone's blind," he said softly. He lifted his hand, touching her cheek. His thumb brushed against one of the scars. "You ain't no beast, Clara. You're just someone who's been hurt." The world seemed to stop for a moment. The rain poured down, soaking them both, but neither of them moved. Her breath hitched, her body shaking, not from the cold, but from something deeper. She hadn't been touched with gentleness in so long she'd forgotten what it felt like. Tears mixed with rain as she whispered, "They locked me in the barn when I was 16. Said my face would shame the family. There was a fire, I don't even remember how it started." Her voice faltered. "When I crawled out, they were gone. They left me there." Eli's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. He didn't have to. He pulled her closer, his large arms wrapping around her as she trembled against his chest. The storm howled around them, but inside that small circle of warmth and strength, there was peace. When the rain finally eased, the air smelled of wet earth and new beginnings. He carried her inside, setting her gently by the fire. She tried to cover her face again, but he stopped her. "No more sacks," he said. "You don't need to hide here." Her eyes met his, uncertain, searching. Then, slowly, she nodded. From that night on, she never wore the sack again. In the mornings, she would stand by the window, the sunlight softening the harsh lines of her scars. The ranch hands stared at first, whispering among themselves, but Eli's gaze silenced them quicker than words. He would walk beside her in town, his arm around her shoulder, daring anyone to speak. At first, people avoided their eyes. But over time, something shifted. They saw how she laughed when the baker's dog chased its tail, how she helped the widow across the street, how Eli looked at her, not with pity but with quiet devotion. One evening, months later, Eli built her a swing on the porch. He'd spent the whole day at it, his shirt off, sweat glistening on his arms as he worked. When it was done, he motioned for her to sit. She did, the wooden seat creaking softly as it swayed. The valley below was awash in gold, the wildflowers nodding in the breeze. He sat beside her, hands rough but gentle as they brushed against hers. "You know," he said, smiling a little, "I used to think my heart was buried with the past. Guess I was wrong." She looked at him, eyes bright. "Where'd you find it, then?" He chuckled softly. "Inside a sack, apparently." She laughed, a sound so pure it seemed to heal the air around them. The sound of a woman who had finally been seen, not for what she'd lost, but for what she still was. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the ranch fell quiet. The beast and the giant sat together, two souls scarred in different ways, bound by the same truth. Sometimes the ugliest things the world hides are the ones that carry the most beauty. And as night wrapped around them, Eli reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away.